In 1982, John DeLorean was running the hottest independent car company in the world. He had $200 million in startup capital, a factory employing thousands of people in Northern Ireland, and a stainless steel sports car with gull-wing doors that looked like nothing else on the road. 1 year later, every penny was gone. The factory was closed, and John DeLorean was sitting in a federal courtroom watching videotape of himself holding a suitcase full of cocaine. But the strangest part of this story isn't the drugs, or the arrest, or the collapse. It's what happened 3 years after the company died, when a Hollywood movie turned his failed car into one of the most famous vehicles in history. This is the story of the DeLorean. To understand how John DeLorean ended up building his own car, you need to understand who he was inside General Motors. Before he was a dreamer or a con man or whatever people decided he was, John DeLorean was one of the most talented automobile engineers in America. He joined Pontiac in 1956 as a packaging engineer, which is about as glamorous as it sounds. But DeLorean had a gift for understanding what young car buyers actually wanted. While the rest of General Motors was building safe, conservative family sedans, DeLorean looked at the roads and saw something different. He saw young men who wanted speed and did not care about practicality. In 1964, he did something nobody at General Motors had the nerve to do. He took a full-size engine and stuffed it into a mid-size Pontiac Tempest chassis. The result was the Pontiac GTO, and it changed everything. The GTO basically invented the American muscle car. It was fast, it was loud, it was cheap, and young people went crazy for it. General Motors sold over 32,000 GTO models in the first year alone. Pontiac went from a sleepy brand your grandfather drove to the hottest nameplate in Detroit almost overnight. DeLorean followed that up with the Firebird, another car that became a symbol of American speed and rebellion. By 1969, DeLorean was running the entire Chevrolet division, the largest in General Motors. He was the youngest division head in the company's history. He was 40 years old, pulling in a massive salary and widely seen as the future president of the whole corporation. But John DeLorean didn't fit in at General Motors, not even close. The executives at General Motors wore dark suits and conservative ties and lived in the same wealthy Detroit suburbs and went to the same country clubs. DeLorean showed up with sideburns, wore Italian suits, and started dating actresses and models. He got a facelift. He drove flashy cars. He married a 20-year-old fashion model when he was in his mid-40s. The boardroom at General Motors did not appreciate any of this. DeLorean later said that General Motors was a place where conformity mattered more than talent, where the goal was to not make waves. He called it a stifling bureaucracy that crushed creativity. In April 1973, John DeLorean quit General Motors. He walked away from one of the most powerful jobs in the American automobile industry with no backup plan, no investor commitments, and nothing but an idea. The idea was this: he wanted to build an ethical sports car, a car that was safe, long-lasting, and beautiful. A car that would not rust, would not go out of style, and would prove that one man could take on the entire auto industry and win. DeLorean started the DeLorean Motor Company and began sketching what would become the DMC-12. The concept was ambitious from the start. The body would be made of unpainted stainless steel panels over a fiberglass underbody, which meant it would never need a paint job and would resist corrosion for decades. The doors would open upward on gull-wing hinges like a fighter jet. The engine would sit in the rear like a Porsche. To design the car, DeLorean hired Giorgetto Giugiaro, one of the most respected automotive designers in the world. Giugiaro had already penned the Lotus Esprit, the Maserati Bora, and the original Volkswagen Golf. The car he drew for DeLorean was angular, dramatic, and futuristic. It looked like a spaceship someone had forgotten to paint. But a beautiful design on paper does not build itself. DeLorean needed money, enormous amounts of money, And this is where the story starts to bend in directions nobody saw coming. DeLorean was a spectacular fundraiser. He had charisma that could fill a room, and he knew how to sell a vision. He raised money from celebrity investors, including Johnny Carson and Sammy Davis Jr. He collected deposits from American car dealers who wanted to sell the DMC-12 before it even existed. He brought in millions from limited partnerships and private placements. But the biggest check came from the most unlikely source imaginable. The British government agreed to fund the construction of a DeLorean factory in Dunmurry, just outside Belfast, Northern Ireland. You have to remember what Northern Ireland looked like in the late 1970s. The Troubles were at their peak. The IRA was bombing buildings. The British Army was patrolling the streets in armored vehicles. Unemployment in parts of West Belfast was approaching 50%. Catholic and Protestant communities were separated by literal walls. Into this landscape walked John DeLorean with a promise: build me a factory, and I will create jobs. Thousands of them. The British government saw an opportunity to bring hope to a devastated economy and wrote checks totaling roughly £100 million. A brand new factory rose out of the farmland at Dunmurry, staffed by workers from both Catholic and Protestant communities. In a place divided by violence, DeLorean's assembly line was one of the few integrated workplaces in Northern Ireland. Production of the DMC-12 began in January 1981. The first cars rolled off the line and onto cargo ships bound for America. When they arrived in dealers' showrooms, people stopped and stared. Nothing on the road looked anything like the DeLorean. The brushed stainless steel panels caught the light in a way that made the car appear almost liquid. The gull-wing doors swung upward with a satisfying mechanical motion that drew crowds in parking lots. The base price was around $25,000, which was roughly equivalent to $65,000 in today's money. That put it squarely in competition with established sports cars from Porsche, Chevrolet's Corvette, and the Datsun 280ZX. But within weeks of the first deliveries, the problems started showing up. The engine was a 2.8-liter V6 built by a joint venture between Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. It produced about 130 horsepower, which was adequate for a European touring car, but deeply underwhelming in a vehicle that looked like it should break the sound barrier. Car magazines tested the DMC-12 and found it took over 10 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. For $25,000, buyers expected a lot more than that. The quality issues were worse. Doors did not align properly. Electrical systems failed. The stainless steel panels showed fingerprints and were nearly impossible to clean once stained. The gull-wing doors leaked in the rain. Some cars arrived at dealerships with gaps between body panels wide enough to slide a finger through. The Dunmurry factory was staffed largely by workers who had never built a car before. Many had been unemployed for years. Training programs were rushed because DeLorean was hemorrhaging cash and needed to start selling vehicles immediately. The result was a car that looked like it had been designed by a genius and assembled by people learning on the job, because essentially it had been. Reviews were mixed at best. Automotive journalists praised the styling and the concept, but could not overlook the sluggish engine and the build quality. One reviewer for a major car magazine wrote that the DeLorean was the kind of car you wanted to love, but could not quite bring yourself to trust. Sales began strong on the back of curiosity and hype, then dropped sharply as word of mouth spread. DeLorean had projected selling 20,000 cars a year. In reality, the factory built approximately 9,000 units total across the car's entire production run. By early 1982, the DeLorean Motor Company was in serious financial trouble. The factory in Dunmurry was burning through money faster than cars were selling. DeLorean had already spent or committed nearly all of the $200 million in startup capital. The British government was growing impatient, and creditors were circling. John DeLorean, who had always been able to talk his way to the next check, was running out of people to convince. If you have been watching this far, you probably already know where this is going. But the details of what happened next are stranger than the headlines ever let on. In the summer of 1982, a man named James Timothy Hoffman contacted DeLorean. Hoffman was a former neighbor and a convicted drug trafficker who was now working as a paid FBI informant. Hoffman told DeLorean he knew people who could help him raise money. A lot of money. Fast. What Hoffman was really doing was setting a trap. Over a series of meetings in hotel rooms and airports, Hoffman and undercover FBI agents presented DeLorean with a deal. The plan was to invest in a cocaine smuggling operation worth $24 million. DeLorean's role would be to provide financing in exchange for a cut of the profits, money he could then funnel back into his collapsing car company. On October 19, 1982, John DeLorean walked into a room at the Sheraton Lorena Hotel near Los Angeles International Airport. FBI cameras were rolling. Agents posing as drug dealers opened a suitcase filled with what appeared to be cocaine. DeLorean looked at it and said that it was better than gold. He was arrested moments later. The footage of John DeLorean staring at that suitcase became one of the most infamous clips in American criminal history. It played on every news channel in the country. The man who had promised to revolutionize the auto industry, who had convinced governments and celebrities and thousands of working people to believe in his dream, was now on camera with a suitcase full of drugs. On the exact same day DeLorean was arrested, the British government placed the Dunmurry factory into receivership. The doors closed. The assembly line stopped. 2,500 workers who had walked into the factory that morning with jobs walked out that afternoon without them. For Belfast, it was a devastating blow. The DeLorean factory had been one of the few bright spots in an economy crushed by decades of conflict. People who had risked their safety to cross sectarian lines and work together were now unemployed again, in a city where unemployment was already catastrophic. The remaining cars on the assembly line were finished by the receivers. A few hundred more DMC-12 cars trickled out. Then production ended permanently. The total number of DeLorean cars ever manufactured was approximately 9,000. If you're the kind of person who stays for stories like this, hit subscribe. I cover the people and machines behind the most unlikely chapters in automotive history every week, because the DeLorean story is not over yet. John DeLorean's trial began in 1984 in a Los Angeles federal courthouse. His defense attorney, Howard Weitzman, argued that the entire cocaine deal was a case of government entrapment. DeLorean, the defense said, was a desperate man being manipulated by a paid informant who stood to profit from creating a crime where none would have existed otherwise. The prosecution played the tapes. They showed DeLorean in those hotel rooms, talking about the deal, handling the suitcase. They argued that no one forced him to say yes. But the jury saw something else on those tapes. They saw FBI agents and informants who seemed to be pushing the deal forward at every stage, manufacturing urgency, creating pressure, closing doors behind DeLorean until he had no way out except the one they had built for him. On August 16, 1984, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of not guilty on all counts. DeLorean was acquitted. He walked out of the courthouse a free man. But being acquitted of drug charges does not rebuild a car company. The DeLorean Motor Company was already gone, the factory closed, the money spent. DeLorean faced additional fraud charges related to the company's finances, which were eventually settled or dismissed, but his reputation as a business leader was finished. John DeLorean spent the rest of his life in a kind of quiet exile. He filed for personal bankruptcy. He attempted a few business ventures that went nowhere. The man who once ran the largest division at General Motors lived his final years in a modest New Jersey estate, largely out of the public eye. He died on March 19, 2005, at the age of 80. Most obituaries focused on the cocaine arrest and the car. Few mentioned the GTO or the Firebird or the fact that he had once been the most promising executive in the American auto industry. And that might have been the end of the story, except for what happened in 1985. A screenwriter named Bob Gale and a director named Robert Zemeckis were working on a film about a teenager who accidentally travels back in time. They needed a vehicle for their time machine, and they wanted something that already looked like it came from the future. They considered a refrigerator. They considered a phone booth. Then someone suggested the DeLorean. It had the stainless steel body, the gull-wing doors, and that angular, futuristic silhouette that Giugiaro had sketched a decade earlier. It was perfect. Back to the Future opened on July 3rd, 1985, and became one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Michael J. Fox driving a DeLorean DMC-12 at 88 miles per hour became one of the most iconic images in movie history. The flux capacitor, the flaming tire tracks, Doc Brown standing in the parking lot with his arms spread wide, all of it burned into the cultural memory of an entire generation. The DeLorean went from being a failed car built by a disgraced executive to being one of the most recognizable automobiles on the planet. And it had nothing to do with the engine or the performance specs. It happened because a couple of filmmakers thought the thing looked cool enough to be a time machine. The irony is almost too neat. A car that couldn't sell 20,000 units in the real world became priceless in the public imagination. A vehicle that was too slow, too expensive, and too poorly built to compete with a Corvette became a symbol of adventure and possibility, and the romantic idea that the future might actually be fun. Today, surviving DeLorean DMC-12s trade hands for anywhere from $30,000 to over $100,000, depending on condition. A company in Humble, Texas purchased the remaining parts inventory and has been rebuilding and maintaining DeLoreans for decades. There's been talk off and on of producing new DeLorean vehicles. The name still carries weight, and the car itself still turns heads. You can park a DeLorean in any parking lot in America, and people will stop to look. It is not the speed that draws them in, and it is definitely not the luxury. It is that the car looks like something that slipped out of a movie and into the real world, like a piece of the future that accidentally showed up 40 years early. John DeLorean's story does not fit into a simple category. He was brilliant and reckless, visionary and careless, a man who saw what the auto industry could be and then destroyed himself trying to get there. Whether you see him as a tragic figure or an architect of his own downfall probably says more about you than it does about him. What's harder to argue with is the car. For all its flaws, for everything that went wrong with it, the DMC-12 outlived the company that built it, the man who dreamed it, and the scandal that was supposed to bury it. If you're still here, I cover stories like this one every week. Cars, machines, and the people behind them. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you want to see another story about an impossible car that almost didn't make it, that video is on screen now